can I just say welcome to everyone, all my Bayside colleagues. Welcome to the Voices of Goldstein. I should say Goldstein, I'll get that right. Panel discussion, Big Deal, focusing on money and its influence on democracy. I'd like to start by acknowledging that our meeting tonight is being held on the traditional lands of the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. Tonight, we hope that we will give you a greater insight into the influence of big money on our democracy and how people like us can actually make a difference to finding solutions to ensure that our democracy is robust. My name's Sally Cockburn. I'm a lifelong Bayside resident. I've lived most of my voting life in the electorate of Goldstein, and I still can't get the name right. I did then. I'm a medical practitioner, but for the last 30 years, I've also been on radio and television and in print. I've been heavily involved in social justice issues, and you may know me as Dr. Feelgood. But just for the record, because we're talking about money tonight, I have no affiliations with any political party, and I'm not being paid, as are none of our people tonight as well. So let me just give you a bit of a housekeeping stuff. The cameras, we'd love you to put your cameras on because we love to see your smiling faces. And we're going to use the chat. This is a meeting, not a webinar. So we're going to use the chat for questions. We would love questions, and we will try and get through them all. Please keep them brief. And make them questions, not policy statements, if you don't mind. And we also ask that you turn your mics off, because it's always really embarrassing when you say, "Love, get us a coffee, will you?" So if you could turn your mics off, that would be fantastic. So let's look at what we're going to do. Now, hopefully you've all had a chance to view the fantastic special screening of Big Deal, Is Our Democracy for Sale, which is a wonderful documentary that I was riveted to. It's directed by Craig Reucassel, and it exposes the extent to, like, see, someone's got their microphone turned on. Love that. It's directed by Craig Reucassel, and it exposes the extent to which money has infiltrated our political process and the non-transparent influence of corporate lobbying. And if you haven't had a chance to look at it, don't worry, because the link is open till midnight. And also, if you've been watching the ABC, it's going to be on the ABC, I think, in about 2 weeks, and it is really worth watching. And I was saying to Craig earlier, it's given me a bit of PTSD, because watching it, I thought, I recognise that happening. I recognise that happening. If you've been involved in anything to do with politics, you've probably recognised a lot of this. But if you haven't had anything to do with politics, then you really need to listen tonight, because you need to know where our democracy is going and what you can do to make sure that it stays on track. For those of us who grew up in Bayside, for those of us who are 3 or 4, like me, 5 generations Baysiders, sometimes we inherited genetically how to vote. But it's time not to just knee-jerk how to vote. It's time to think and make your vote count. And that's what we're looking at tonight, what we can do. This is not about a political party. This is about all political parties and really the opportunities that we've got. So what I'd like to do at this juncture is introduce you to our panel, and you should be able to see them all. Let me tell you, Craig Reucassel, who is an Australian television icon and radio comedian, best known for his documentary series, Big Weather, The Fight for Planet A and War on Waste, and his work with the satirical comedy group The Chaser. Call you a rebel? I think we will, Craig. Craig brings a wealth of experience and an impressive track record in delivering engaging content and impact campaigns that raise awareness, change behaviour and influence the policy arena. So welcome, Craig.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, and look, congratulations on the doco. It's just wonderful. So we'll see what people have to say. I'm sure they'll all agree.
Well, they'll all say it was much better because Craig wasn't on the screen. It was a brilliant decision.
Well, I know. I was waiting for you to pop up. Yeah. So no, look, but well done. We've also got Saffron Zomer. She's a lawyer, a campaigner, a political strategist. She's waving, with more than a decade's experience leading law reform campaigns, both with the Australian Democracy Network, the Australian Australian Conservation Foundation. Saffron co-founded and led the Hands Off Our Charity Alliance. Love your work, Saffron, which secured critical changes to the 2017 Electoral Act amendments to protect the rights of civil society organisations to engage engage in advocacy. So welcome, Saffron.
Sorry, a bit slow off the unmute button.
No, that's all
Lovely
right.
to be here. Can't wait to have a chat.
And I think one of the things that that you obviously can help us with is understanding the importance of getting involved in legislative change. Because if we don't change the legislation, things don't change.
100%. Many ideas. I'm sure we'll have that conversation as we move along.
Indeed. And finally, our third panel member is Kylie McIntosh, PhD. She's a real doctor, and she's a Goldstein local, and she's the Voices of Goldstein spokesperson tonight. So she'll tell us all about what is the Voices of Goldstein if you aren't aware. She's a mum, a health professional and a scientist. She's passionate about health and environmental issues. And in particular, Kylie's concerned about our lack of action and obfuscation on climate and by the current government, in addition to the apparent decline in the integrity of the Australian political climate. She's also the Vice President of the Bayside Climate Crisis Action Group, BCCAG.
BCAG, yes.
BCCAK.
BCAG, yes.
BCAG. Oh, I was going to say, did I say something? And welcome to you, Kylie. And I'm just wondering, tonight we're really looking to help people understand how you don't have to be a corporate to make a difference. And we as a collection can make a difference. So can you basically tell us a little bit about the Voices of Goldstein and what you hope to achieve?
Thank you, Sally. Look, thank you very much, and add my congratulations to you, Craig and team, for a fabulous documentary. Absolutely love it. I have to say I'm a huge fan. You revolutionised the management of waste in our household. Not sure my family was entirely happy about that at the time, but I'm sure they are now. Look, Voices of Goldstein is all about community. Voices of Goldstein, I guess, in conjunction with a number of other groups around the country, was formed by our local community around about not quite 12 months ago, in response to concerns with what is happening with democracy in Australia and with the representation that we have locally, that people are not happy with the representation that we have locally. Goldstein is a very safe Liberal seat. There is a sense of being taken for granted, and there is also a sense that, and this is with local Liberal voters, so obviously we do have very strong support for the Liberal Party traditionally, but people are saying the Liberal Party that they not so much signed up for, but the Liberal Party that they've been supporting for a long time is not the Liberal Party that it was, that the party has moved away from addressing the concerns, the values of the people who have been voting for them, and that our current member, in the way that he has voted, is really no different to Barnaby Joyce or Matt Canavan in the outcomes that we're getting and the way that they're voting. And they are some of the concerns. So Voices of Goldstein is not a political party. We are a community group that is advocating for something better. And channeling a little bit of Lincoln, this is about government of the people, for the people, by the people, and in part inspired by the campaigns and the success of people like Helen Haynes and Zali Steggall, I think, who've showed us what independents can do and what they can achieve in recent years.
I was just going to say that. I mean, we've got some examples of people as independents. Karen Phelps did it. There's been a whole lot of people, and were they all part of a Voices movement, or are they? Is this now sort of this sort of template?
Look, Karen wasn't actually a part of the Voices movement as such, but I mean, certainly the strong independent voices and independents supported by their communities. Cathy McGowan really started that in Indi. So when she took over from the Liberal incumbent, that was back in 2013, with a very successful community campaign behind her, and really founded that Voices movement. And Cathy has continued to support and to foster that movement. And there are now up to around somewhere between 35 to 40 Voices groups around the country. So it's certainly not an issue that is localised to Goldstein. This is a national concern, but this is local, I guess, local community doing our bit in our electorate, which, you know, is considered a safe Liberal seat.
It hasn't always been a Liberal seat, though, and from what I'm hearing, you're saying it's not really just one particular party. We're looking to expose all parties.
We are, but I mean, Goldstein has actually always been a Liberal held seat. So it's never been held by Labor.
Must have been when I was growing up in Isaacs.
Yeah, it certainly is a very safe Liberal seat. But I think something that came out of the Warringah campaign and the election of Zali Steggall was she was pitching her campaign to disaffected Liberal voters and saying, actually, I'm what might be called a small L Liberal, economically conservative, but socially and environmentally progressive. So the key issues that are coming up time and again through our community engagement activities, so things like the kitchen table conversations, which were also undertaken in the electorates of Indi and also Warringah, and that is that people are very concerned, firstly, at lack of action on climate change. You know, this is an existential threat that is just not being taken seriously by our government. And second, I mean, very important issue, and this is really part of the, you know, this is what Craig and his team are addressing in the documentary, and that is government integrity, in this instance, political donations, lack of transparency around political donations, what money can buy. So this fits in really well with the concerns that we are trying to see addressed through the Voices movement, Voices of Goldstein in particular.
So what do you hope, what does Voices of Goldstein hope to get out of this evening's event? And why did you choose to screen this documentary?
Well, obviously this fits really well with one of the issues that we're trying to address in terms of integrity and transparency in government. Also, and again, thank you to Craig and the producers as a fundraising event for Voices of Goldstein, and looking to highlight the issues around donations. But having said that, and this is all about money, as you say at the start of the documentary, having said that, for us to successfully match and hopefully to identify and to support a candidate, an independent candidate for Goldstein, we do need money. So we are asking for people to pledge. So this money will not actually be immediately donated, but if we're to find a candidate, we need money to support that campaign, so to support that person progress. And we actually have a target of $120,000 by the 8th of October, which is just a few days away, and we're actually almost at $100,000 now. So it would be lovely if people tonight, after seeing the discussion and having watched the documentary, would think, actually, we'd really love to support this local campaign and to make a pledge via our website. And I'm sure Henry could put the link in the chat.
And the interesting thing about that, and I noticed that when Cathy McGowan was interviewed in the documentary, she said little, like small donations from a lot of people make a difference. And on that note, maybe we might move to Craig and say, congratulations again, Craig. Absolutely wonderful. I'm hoping that most of the people who are watching tonight, who are here in the chat, have seen it. But what motivated you to do this film?
It's a long story. Well, let me just firstly say I'm coming to you from Gadigal land. And please recognise the owners, past and present here. Look, it's a topic I've been interested in for a long time. Christian and Jungle Entertainment have been actually working on it before I joined in, but I'd been kind of wanting to do something on this, and my interest in it had been invigorated because I just made 2 climate change documentaries. And the part of the story that wasn't told in them was how come everything seems to lead to us taking action and we don't in Australia. And that really is because of the kind of money and the influence and the networks that are set up in Canberra. And so I wanted to look at that. And it's not just, obviously, you don't have to, climate change may not be your number one issue. It could be gambling, it could be healthcare, it could be other things. And all of these issues are affected by this. So yeah, I really wanted to look into this and see what was holding us back, I guess.
So I know what shocked me the most, but I'd like to know whether it's the same. What shocked you in your travels?
Oh, it shocked me. Look, I was both. Let me give the negative and the positive. Okay, on the negative side, I think watching Sam Dastyari just kind of really unemotionally lay out the way it works. You know, because he's just saying, and you can see why it makes sense. You go, my job was to raise this money so we could win this election. I can't not raise more money because there's no stopping the Liberal Party or the Labor Party. We've got to get as much as we humanly can, and this is how you win campaigns. It's just the kind of brutality of that, but also just the kind of like seeing Jeff McLeod just sitting there and being like so nonchalant about paying $100,000 for a lunch. That was quite shocking to me. My most expensive lunch is only $95,000, so it was really over the top. But on the other side, I was actually also surprised in a positive way when we did visit the Voices for Indi people. I think because I was aware of some of the story there, but to also hear about some of the really little things about it, the kind of, you sign up and you make sure we're not going to be negative about anyone else. We go to Canberra and we help out. All of these little structural things that just went, oh my God, this is such a beautiful thing. It was just really, it was kind of uplifting.
And in my experience, as I say, I grew up in this area, and I don't know how familiar you might be with the Bayside area, Craig, but I remember as a little kid going to a fundraiser at the local, what is now the local Sandringham Hospital, and my mother and my grandmother were both on the scone drive sort of thing. And it was like, you live in Bayside, you get involved. And I mean, this sounds like we're reinvigorating communities.
Yeah, and exactly. And look, by the way, there are people here that are absolute dyed-in-the-wool Liberal and Labor. I'm not here for any party political reason. I'm actually saying, to be honest, we need more of you to get involved in your parties as well, because at the moment there's none of the grassroots in their parties either. And that's the problem. At the moment, I had a fascinating chat to one politician who said to me, he grew up on the left of his party and all their fundraising used to be, at the restaurant where everyone would chip in $10, $20 and you get 200 people around, and that was how you did it. And then I won't give away too much, but he was elevated much higher, and suddenly it was like, well, it's a lot easier for us to get this money just to have a dinner with 6 people who will all chip in, 50 grand or something. And you kind of go, that's that imbalance. It's like, going back to that raising money through small donations from everyone is kind of fine. That's not really distorting democracy. But if you have a system whereby you're doing that and then somebody's kicking in 100 grand, or if somebody's putting in $80 million to run their entire, Clive Palmer style campaign, the distortion comes from that lack of balance. And we've got to fix that.
The thing that shocked me the most was 2 things. One was the lack of transparency in these donations, that you have to donate a certain amount before it's known. And also the fact that, and you must have been asleep if you haven't seen what's going on in New South Wales this week, that there's no ICAC in the federal arena.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about no ICAC in the federal arena, though, is they also have very few rules. So the interesting thing about all the stuff we talked about in the doco is legal. We're not telling you what's illegal.
You mean Clive Palmer and Craig Kelly's ads are legal?
Well, they are. This is it. I mean, political parties set up rules so that they can't get in trouble and so that they have an advantage. So we go, okay, advertisers, you have to have misleading and deceptive conduct rules, but there's an exception for politicians. There's spam rules about spamming somebody's phone, but there are exceptions for political parties. So what they've done is they set up all these exceptions themselves, and we're currently seeing Craig Kelly and Clive Palmer abuse those rules, but they're the rules that are being set up by the political parties.
I'm holding this pen because you'll see it's got no branding on it. I'm a doctor and I can't even get pens from a pharmaceutical company anymore because I'll get into trouble. But these pollies, they can.
Isn't it funny that the politicians passed laws deciding that doctors would be so influenced by the pen they were given?
Whoa,
but apparently politicians are so clever and so across it that they are in no way influenced by very large donations and offers of employment after. I mean, I don't know. They're amazing people.
I have to tell you as an aside, when you work at a radio station or anywhere, you have a lanyard and you put your entry card on it. My lanyard was for a drug that treated herpes. I knew no one would steal it, and they didn't. We'll come back to you, Craig, and we're looking for your questions, and there's some coming up at the moment. We will go around the panel first, and then we'll come to questions. But Saffron. Concrete examples. Can I just give you the massive concrete example that woke me up to this was Brian Harradine and Telstra. And this was a deal, I understand, that allegedly was done in the back rooms about a drug that was used for women's health, an abortion drug. And if and allegedly, again, although he's dead, so I can probably say it, that Brian would vote for a Telstra bill if they hived off this drug. That to me was a concrete example, and I had to get involved. I mean, are there many more of those?
Yeah, thanks, Sally. There are so many more. I feel tempted to chuck this one back to you, Craig, but I'll take a first crack at it. There are so many that I feel like maybe actually what's most useful is just to like reflect on one. So actually one that's been on my mind a little bit of late is a bit dated, but I think also like kind of evergreen. So let me take you all back to 2010, when our brand new Prime Minister Rudd announced that he was going to introduce a super profits tax on the mining industry. And at that time, if you recall, the resources industry was just booming. Like every major mining company was making billions of dollars of profits. And the super profits tax was actually a recommendation of the Henry Tax Review. So, you know, came from a very kind of proper procedural part of government, which just spat out a bunch of economic recommendations, and this is one that the government picked up. The mining industry went bananas, and they immediately pulled together a big fighting fund. They spent $22 million on a very aggressive ad campaign, and they gave a couple of $1 million each to the Liberal and National parties. And within 6 weeks, the minerals super profits tax was dead, and of course, the Prime Minister was gone as well. But the reason that example has been on my mind is that you might remember as well last year, the government appointed Nev Power, who is a career gas executive, to head up the National COVID Coordination Commission, which was this body that they put together to advise the government on the best pathways out of the pandemic. And all of a sudden, it was very clear that what we needed was a gas-fired recovery, like maybe a coincidence, maybe not. And there was this multi-partisan love affair with the gas industry going on. And a colleague of mine, who I won't name, went to sit down with some very senior people in the Labor Party and said to them, like, I don't understand why you are on the gas bandwagon. Like, you know, it won't rebuild the economy, you know, it won't create jobs, you know, it doesn't stack up environmentally. Why are you doing this? It seems so stupid. And they said to him, we have lost 2 prime ministers to this issue and we are not picking another fight on it. And that's it. We're just not going there. And when he shared that story with me, I was like, you know, $22 million for an industry of that size, it's like one of us going out to buy coffee. You know, it's just like such a trivial amount of money. And for that spend, they've been able to control resources policy in this country for over a decade. And they've also created a generation of politicians who are so scared of them that a whole chunk of things that are completely common sense have become unmentionable in Australia. And so I think that's a really good example, because there's so many ways you can deploy your money. You can give it to parties, you can use it to attack parties, you can use it to offer cushy jobs to important people. So like if you're thinking about money in politics as being like, you know, I hand Craig an Aldi bag full of cash, there's a lot more complexity to it than that. But yeah, I mean, we could have this conversation sharing our favorite examples all night, but there's one to kick us off.
I'm not saying I'm not accepting Aldi bags full of cash, though, just, you know.
Have you got anything to add at the moment, Kylie? Hang on, you mute. Yeah.
Thanks, Sally. No, I'm off mute now. Look, just thinking of the figures that were quoted in the documentary, Craig, about the spend of each of the 2 major parties at the last election. So the Liberal Party was $165 million from memory, and the Labor Party, I think, was something like $126 million. Yeah. And just thinking that Liberal Party campaign spend was really boosted by $80 million from Clive Palmer. I mean, just the distortion of that I find absolutely astonishing. And at the time when he's putting candidates up in every seat, there was a candidate for the United Australia Party here in Goldstein who really wasn't all that serious about what he was doing from what we could see. But I presume that Clive Palmer offered them some sort of incentive to stand everywhere. But the money and the influence that had on the election, you know, I mean, it's just astonishing that he could just, that was okay for him to put that money in.
So one of the things that the doco showed was, and I'll put as a question to you, Craig, what do the parties do with all of this money that they get?
Well, I mean, they run their parties. I mean, just firstly, you should point out that that's not all, that also doesn't all come from donations. So actually the largest part comes from public funding. And this is the thing that everyone, it's funny how often people say to me, you know what we should do? We should bring in public funding of political parties. You go, we did do that. We've already done it. We did it years ago under Bob Hawke, I think. So you do get public funding based on, you know, the votes that you get. The only thing we didn't do is we didn't stop the other form of money. And so this is what leads to, and I think it's interesting that both Sam Dastyari and Malcolm Turnbull both said there's an arms race. And that's because there's no caps on it. You just have to keep going. You can't stop. You can't stop because you can't get to, like, we got to the $120,000 for our electorate, which is actually what New South Wales set for their electorate, for each electorate, and go, okay, we've got there now, we can stop. You've just got to just keep going, keep going, keep going. So, but they spend it on the running parties and that kind of thing, but then they also spend it on election ads and all of that kind of stuff around election time. You heard Sam Dastyari say, you know, it's cost millions of dollars to run ads during election time. Now, the problem is that, now, is that essential towards a democracy? Now, the United Kingdom, or England, has had a rule for many years: you can't have television advertising, you can't have digital advertising. Now, they seem to still be running a democracy over there. We can debate how effective, but, you know, so, like, you're kind of saying the political party's role is, we need all this money to run all this campaign advertising because that's an important part of democracy. You go, no. If we limited it to the amount you get just from the public money, we'd have less advertising there. We'd have a more equitable system, and we wouldn't, you know, be bombarded by those ads constantly.
So, Saffron, what about the law? I mean, obviously, when you've got big parties in government, they make the law. If we get independents in, can we make a difference? Can we get laws through to basically do what Craig suggested, which is, you know, limit the money that they can use on advertising?
Yeah, I'm totally convinced that we can. None of this is set in stone by any means. The way it is now doesn't at all need to be the way it continues to be. I think there are actually multiple pathways to get it done. One could be that we elect independents and there's a minority government and independents force action on the issue. But I actually think by working in the community and creating pressure on all the candidates who are attempting to be elected to office, whether or not you elect an independent, you are going to change the amount of political pressure on the major parties to do better on this.
So you're saying that, and I think, Craig, you mentioned it too, which is maybe there's people here tonight who have already made up their mind how they're going to vote for one of the major parties, let's say, but at least make sure you know what your candidates stand for. And on that, because big money isn't the only threat, there's ideology. And we've seen there's been some ideological issues brought to the fore in New South Wales. And may I say, New South Wales, this is one of my little things, New South Wales is the only state that hasn't passed laws on voluntary assisted dying. And there was something in the paper, on the news tonight, saying that the new Premier of New South Wales is not in favour of voluntary assisted dying. Can an independent make a difference?
An independent can make a difference if they push for that. And, you know, like, an independent doesn't have to have the balance of power also to influence the debate. Also by the fact that independents will often put forward bills and legislation and bring, you know, a focus to something that's not been put there beforehand. But in the instances Saffron mentioned, where independents do get the balance of power, you get enormous change. And if you look back in Australia, the biggest bit of climate saving legislation we had was not brought on by the Labor Party, but was brought through the Labor Party when they were being held by some independents. You know, they were in a minority government. The independents actually gave them the courage to do something. So independents can make a big difference. I mean, I don't think ideology is ever going to be lost from politics, and that's part of it. If you are somebody who opposes that, you should vote for Dominic Perrottet or something. But this is the interesting thing, I guess, is when people are making that decision, you want to be clear what they're making the decision on the basis of. You know, if Dominic Perrottet is making on the basis of his Catholic faith, that's fine. If he's making a decision based on some donation that we don't know about in the public that really kicks up their coffers and it's, you know, necessary for his party, it's a very different situation. So that's what we want to be careful of, and that goes back to that transparency.
So transparency is the biggest issue. Saffron, where do we stand with laws about transparency?
Our transparency laws are terrible. Like really, like you have to wait till next year to find out who's given money to whom. It's almost kind of comical how bad they are. But again, there's plenty of good examples of how to do it right. In terms of the solutions, we've actually done a lot of thinking about this because I think, as the movie makes pretty clear, there are such a kind of interconnected cluster of problems that are holding our democracy back from being the way that we want it to be. We don't think there is any one fix that's the silver bullet that will just make everything work right. So after a lot of consultation with experts and community groups and others, we've written what we call a framework for a fair democracy that outlines all the changes that we think we need around election spending and donations caps and transparency and lobbying and disinformation in elections and all the things that are in that movie. Because we actually think we need to put a really ambitious package on the agenda and demand that our elected representatives take this seriously and fix it.
Let's move to some of the questions and we'll come back to the panel again. Virginia has said, I've signed a lot of petitions over the past few months. What's the chance of them making a difference? I think that's a really good question. Who would like to answer that?
Saffron,
I want to have first go at it, yeah. The answer is, it depends. So let me give you one example. I've run a lot of campaigns which use petitions as a tool. On one of those occasions, when I was working at the Australian Conservation Foundation, we actually managed to get the biggest petition in ACF's 50-year history. We printed it out and had it in a massive cardboard box that took 2 people to carry. And we brought 7 Australian Conservation Foundation members from all around the country to Canberra. And we went across the Senate crossbench who were going to decide on this piece of legislation that the petition related to. We took the community members into their office, plonked the box with the petition down on their desk, and then we had a video camera and we asked them to please report back to the signers of the petition what they were going to do about the bill. And so they had to speak to camera and tell us their response to the petition. And we cut it into a nice little video and sent it back to everybody who had signed the petition to let them know what the senators had said in response to them. We won that, and it was incredibly impactful to ask the decision makers to respond directly to the people who had signed the petition. I feel like that was definitely a moment that like turned those people around, and the ones who supported us already supported us more because they were on camera saying that they did. So that's an example, I think, of a moment where a petition was used really strategically. Oftentimes, I think they're used for other purposes, like getting your information to build a list, or trying to give people something easy to do that makes us feel engaged with an issue, and they can be much less impactful. The question is, like, how strategic is the campaign that the petition is part of, really?
So there'll be people here tonight who sort of say, look, I don't want to stand for Parliament. How can I help living in this local area? There may be people who are saying, I'd like to stand as an independent. And I suppose, Kylie, you'd like to hear from them. Oh, Kylie's frozen.
Is Kylie frozen?
Well, I haven't frozen, have I? I'm paranoid.
While we wait for Kylie to unfreeze, oh, she's coming back, obviously. I'll just say, we were talking about transparency earlier, and can we do things? And I think Saffron's right that you need a lot of changes. But one of the things, for instance, is that in Queensland, declarations of donations have to be made public within 7 days of them happening rather than 1 year. And, they also have a diary where, where ministers are meeting with lobbyists and other things. And I just think it's extraordinary that if Queensland, the state of Sir Joe Bjelke-Petersen, is ahead of you, you really should catch up when it comes to political donations and transparency and that. So, yeah, it can be done, and some of our states are doing it, but the federal level is very far behind.
I've got a question for you, Craig, from Jack. And Jack says, what are your thoughts on the new federal ICAC party? Do you believe that this is a source of change in regard to political donations?
I don't know the federal ICAC party, to be honest.
Don't know about it. No.
I think a federal ICAC is quite an important thing, and I think having a number of parties running on that issue is important. I mean, to be honest, the Labor Party's even said they're going to bring one in, although we'll wait until we see the actual legislation. Yeah, but again, part of it, you got to bring in. You kind of need the cop on the beat, which is the federal ICAC. but you also need the actual rules to be changed so that they're actually stopping the things. Because at the moment, you could have the federal cop, and all the stuff most of the stuff we're talking about is still legal. So yeah.
Saffron, Virginia's just asked, how do we find out more about your framework for a fair democracy?
I am going to put the link to the website in the chat right now. And I would actually love, while you're listening, if you open another browser and head on over there, there's 2 buttons. You can endorse the framework as a concerned citizen and add your voice to the 6,000 plus people who've already said that they would like our next parliament to legislate this whole package, which would be great. And if you keep the little box ticked that says you'd like to stay on our list, then we can keep in touch about further opportunities.
Read it first, though, Saffron. You're not encouraging people to
trust me. It's perfect. You can just sign it. If you happen to represent an organisation, there's also a button for organisations to sign up. If you feel like you need to read the detail, of course, take your time.
My brother's a lawyer, and he told me I always had to read the detail. Craig, I've got another question for you from Jenny. And I have to say I must be politically inept because I don't know about this group either. What did you learn from Ian Walker from the New Democracy Foundation about how to do democracy differently?
Yeah,
and how realistic or practical are these ideas, given that it's politicians' interests to retain control over access to decision making?
Yeah, so the New Democracy Foundation is looking at some really interesting models of like citizen-based jury type approaches to decision making, where you get a cross section of members of the community to come together, you give them the information, and then they kind of help come up with the decision that will be made. And it's been done it was done in France with some of their climate legislation. It's been tried in other different areas. We didn't kind of get to that in this documentary because it's kind of like the next step, and we were still, but there's some really fascinating stuff out there. And I, if you, it'd be great to look into that. And it is another way of getting more people involved. And I guess that's the crucial part about this is actually getting more people involved in democracy.
Now, is that the Irish solution, or is that something else?
The Irish solution, well, what we talked about the Ireland was just that was one of the countries that has done a bit more than us on this. They've actually brought in legislation to lower the number, cap donations, to make it so that there was a lobbying register that everyone knows what's happening and what people are lobbying on. They've just gone that extra bit. Canada's done it as well. There's, other countries have done it. So we're running behind it a little bit. We've got Kylie's back.
Hi, Kylie. Welcome back.
Hi, thank you. My internet crashed. It was very bad timing. We talked about this beforehand, Sally, and you were thinking, I hope it doesn't happen now. It just happened to me. So sorry.
No, you're back. That's what's important. Now, Sarah says, and I actually thought this too, I must say, when I watched the doco, the film shows that when people feel there is a threat to their local community, such as fracking, they get really involved and they do all sorts of things. And they come together. But how do we get voter engagement with a need for structural reform? I mean, and amendments to donation law, ICAC, when they are not directly a visible threat? I suppose that's why we're doing this, to say they are a visible threat. But how do we get people to realise that this is a threat to our local community because it's a threat to democracy?
I think if I can answer that one, Sally, just our key issue that has been raised as, the number one concern in our community engagement activities, as I mentioned, is real concern and anxiety around the lack of action on climate change. I mean, this is an existential threat to all of us. This is not just around farming lands. I mean, Australia is very exposed in terms of the risk to our country of the impact of climate change. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen from our federal government, and this is not just, this is just the Greens or this is conservation groups in Australia. You can now hear international condemnation of our lack of action. We are considered globally a climate laggard, and it's just not good enough. And the absolute bare minimum now is to sign up to the net zero by 2050, and yet our Prime Minister's still inching towards it, and people are like, but he's changed his language, he's softened his stance, and now he's talking about, look, I think we would like to get to net zero by 2050, and I hope that we'll get there as soon as possible. Well, Mr. Morrison Hope is not a plan and soon is not a time. And we want something that is a whole lot faster than that. That's just not good enough. You look at the Climate Council and others, we're actually taking evidence and, recommendations from scientists. And we really need at least 50%, but probably 75% by 2030.
I think that there's a fabulous comment in here from Chris, who says, does a grassroots, and I think Chris is encapsulated, does a grassroots campaign mean people may think about voting before election day? There are statistics that a substantial number of voters think about it on the way to the booth. So do we have to really stir people up to think about, well, what are you actually voting for, and don't just grab a card and fill it in?
I think a part of what we're saying with the community campaigns is to raise awareness of, being part of a democracy is actually participating, and it doesn't have to be just by voting. Obviously, it's compulsory to vote, which is a great thing in Australia, but there's more that you can do. Firstly, thinking about who are you voting for and why, and what do they stand for? And as we've talked about, not just having that blind sort of, whether it's obligation, habit, whatever it is, sticking to whatever party that we've always voted for, but thinking about, and what are they delivering? And are we concerned with what we're seeing as a result? Are we happy with the representation we have? So some of the discussions that we have at the kitchen table conversations are around, what would you like to see? So what are the ideal qualities of a representative that we would like working for us? And talking as well to the independent MPs, so Zali Steggall and Helen Haynes and their constituents are delighted. They are so happy to be a part of the process. And both of those MPs have said, they can't go down the street shopping without being involved in great long discussions with their constituents. They have this very genuine engagement with their local community, and they are seen as very approachable. People are happy to come up and talk to them. Helen Haynes, as you highlighted in the documentary, and I just love this, has some of her voters, some of her local constituents accompany her to Canberra and volunteer in her office. I mean, how good is that? That's real participation in democracy.
It sounds like the Bayside way to me. I mean, people around here, we love to get involved.
Absolutely, we do.
That's the key of it. It's interesting because, I don't think the whole Voices of movement's just about election day at all. And this is actually a crucial thing about it. It's about actually engaging with your democracy in between election days. It's about having an engaged group of people in your electorate who do have conversations about what we think about important issues, may have disagreements at time, where you can seriously go, look, we are a very large proportion, or we're a large group of people from your electorate. Whether we lose or win, let's just presume you lose, you can still go to your local member and talk to them and say, this is an issue where we think you have fallen out of step with the community. We voted for you. You're meant to be representing us in this way. You're not. And again, that pressure is an important part of democracy. It means that when that person does go to Canberra, and there's these other pressures that come from the very system that we've described here, when they're getting those other pressures, they're less likely to respond to those because they go, I've got a really powerful group of people back in my home who are really attuned. They don't just tune in one day every 3 years. They will know what I'm doing, and they will be, on my back about it. So it's about being engaged in politics, not just about election day or about voting, or even about, interestingly enough, I've spoken to a lot of Voices of groups. Some don't even have candidates. They're not going to have, and it's about a lot more than just that election day, I'd say.
So we're hearing it's about transparency. It's about capping money. It's about having people electing people who will represent us. And if that is a large political party, make sure you've done your homework. And as I love the comment someone made earlier, which was get involved. If you want to vote for a large political party, be a member, get involved, look at pre-selection. It's not, but getting back to, I suppose, an independent member, what are you looking for, Kylie, in someone who might want to be an independent representative for Goldstein?
Look, again, I'm sure Henry or Kat could post in the chat our website. So we've actually detailed the qualities of the candidate that we're looking for to represent Goldstein. And we've also detailed the key priorities of the community that we would like that MP to advocate for. And in terms of qualities, obviously outstanding in terms of integrity and transparency and the values that we would like to see upheld. Someone who is genuinely lives within the local area. So you want someone who lives here, not someone who's
Not parachuted in.
That's right. That's right. We don't want that. Someone who does have a genuine association with the area. It may or may not be someone with an established profile. And, you know, obviously we do want them to be professional. We want them to be politically savvy. We would even, obviously, all of the bits and pieces, thinking about what sort of a social media profile have you had. You didn't post anything awful, you know, on Facebook at some time in the public. You know, there's all
social
those...
media savvy.
But it's interesting hearing you say that, because I heard Helen Haynes last night talking about ending up the candidate. And I think the reality was, she's like, it's still an utter shock to her, in that, you know, she had no desire to become a politician at all. She's just a normal member of the community who actually was one of the local members of the community that went up to Parliament when Cathy McGowan was in there. And just through being part of the Voices of movement, kind of ended up being the candidate because, you know, he was involved in all the conversations about it. And that's the thing, is somebody might be sitting here watching right now going, there's no chance I'd ever end up being the candidate. It may end up being you.
Well, that's a good point, Craig. Anyone who's interested, we do have that information on our website. We are talking to a number of people. Yeah.
And looking at all of you, you look good.
And listening to Cathy McGowan, the thing that comes across is her passion, her commitment, and that's really, I'm sure, what would really get people going. I've got a question from Elizabeth. In Australia, one of the big factors that influence people's perceptions of the Democratic parties, yes, Craig, is the media and what they put forward. When the media is owned by a couple of large companies, what action can be taken to regulate ownership of media companies in Australia? Well, there's the $60 million question.
Yeah, there's another question. Yeah, look, to be honest, we had to keep focused in this documentary because there's a number of different problems with our democracy, and the media concentration of ownership is one of them, definitely. I would caution, I think there's a tendency to give too much credit, I'd say, at the moment to, for instance, the Murdoch papers or whatever. I mean, you live in a state where they have gone against the candidate that's won for a lot of time. They don't necessarily win that way. It doesn't always, I mean, it's an very influential thing, but don't overstate its influence.
And is it
and also it's also just, by the way, it's part of this same network. Like, you know, the big money of the gas companies also goes through those media organizations. That's why they have a certain perspective at times. And, you know, so it's all part of the very same network.
And also with the rise of social media has also meant there's been a rise in people commenting on the what the media says, and people realizing, hang on, I'm not the only one who thinks that was a bit out of line. So have things changed? You know, is social media changing the landscape and assisting us?
Yeah, well, social media has certainly lowered the price of interacting with the community. So previously, it was obviously you would have to raise money to put an ad into the newspaper because that was the only option. So I think that there's been a lowering of the barrier of entry because of social media. I'm not saying that social media is without its own problems. Not
100%. I feel like, though, Sally, while we're talking about media, like, we can't leave the topic without remembering that there's actually a lot of evidence that tells us that the most persuasive communication is from someone like you in your neighborhood, having a personal conversation. There's nothing that, that's like the gold standard of political communication. And so the work that you're doing can short circuit all the rest of the bullshit that we're talking about now. And I mean, the question is, how much can you scale it? But there's nothing better than that. So, you know, that's worth just remembering that you do have the solution at your fingertips.
And the thing is, we now also have this medium, Zoom meetings, where we can have community meetings where people can actually meet from at home, and you can have those discussions. So I suppose I've got another question here from Jenny for you, Saffron, and this is really important. I'd love to get everyone to put their hand up whether they agree with all of the things we've brought up, because how do you not just preach to the converted? How do you engage everybody?
Yeah, that's a really important question. We'll never win, never win if we just, stick with the people who are most like us and agree with us the most. I think there's a few things that are kind of in our favour on this one, and that is that this is genuinely not a left-right issue. If you think about the electorates that got jack of being taken for granted by their federal representative and booted them out, their blue ribbon Liberal seats, Mayo, Indi, Wentworth, they're not like, the inner city latte belt at all. And so I do think we've done quite a bit of message testing and research on this, and it doesn't matter whether you're in the suburbs, the regions, like this is a very shared concern that people don't feel heard and they don't feel represented. So I actually think the group of potential supporters is really large. We just have to reach those people. And the reason that we were so excited to see this documentary fronted by Christian is that he is a person that a lot of the people we want to reach can hear. Like they can't hear me because they sound like a kind of political hack, which I am, but they can hear Christian. And so it's a really amazing communication opportunity that we have here. I want everyone to see this movie. Please share it with your friends.
Great, especially when he nearly cried when he was driving the car.
He was crying.
I know. And I mean, that was
I was crying behind the camera too.
Oh, it was beautiful. So I just got a question here that I think from Meredith for you, Kylie. And I had a question similarly that I was going to ask. And Meredith says, how is the Voices movement managing the issue of donations and transparency? And before you answer that, I would say, isn't there a bit of a catch-22 here? Are we just becoming like them? We're asking everyone to give money. How do you manage all of that?
Look, absolutely, it is about money. I mean, yes, as the documentary says, this is a story about money. But the reality is we cannot compete against the major parties if we have no money to fund a campaign. Absolutely, we do want to build up an army of volunteers to support us, and there's lots of different ways that you can contribute. Wearing one of these lovely purple t-shirts, walking around the streets and having conversations, and they may not necessarily be conversations where you go up and pester people, but people do come and ask, and we have been doing that as well. In terms of the money, so obviously to run a professional campaign and also to attract a candidate. So the difference with the community independent model is that you have the community first and then you attract the candidate, as opposed to a regular kind of independent candidate who nominates and then tries to attract the votes. And so what we're doing is building momentum and building that community and trying to raise money and awareness and then attract a high quality candidate so that they can then run as our community independent and supported MP. So that is the intention. In terms of, so obviously, as I mentioned at the start too, we are not a political party as such, we're a community group. And at this stage, we are looking, as I said, for pledges, trying to reach that amount of 120,000 by the 8th of October and getting there. We are getting there, but we need the money to help fund a campaign or to go towards a professional campaign.
So it sounds like there's two things that need to happen, is get the grassroots happening and
correct
the rest. And I've got to just say, I think Bayside is, I read some statistic, and I'll make it up even if it isn't true, that we have the largest per capita ratio of doggies. And so with lockdown, we go doggy walking. What a perfect time to engage people.
It is indeed. That's a great time to wear your T-shirt out when you're out dog walking. I think it's about 40% of households in the area, roughly, have a dog. At least
I reckon
one
it's
dog.
more.
But think of all the apartments. There may not necessarily be lots of dogs in the apartments. Yes, there are a lot of dogs around, but all sorts of things. I mean, we've certainly, we've got beautiful beaches to go and have a walk on through lockdown. So there are those opportunities to run into people. And we have had those discussions out and about in the streets, as I've said, all sorts of comments or funny looks or what's going on here. And I believe even one in the street where a gentleman came up and said, whatever you do, just get rid of Barnaby Joyce. So I mean, there's all sorts of thoughts about what we're doing and why. But at the end of the day, to run a professional campaign, we do need money to support that. But having said that, we will be very transparent around the donations that we receive. And so there is work going on at the moment to finalise how those donations will be made in terms of, transparency, declaring those donations.
Look, we're
So
actually...
this is it. It's still lots of little donations are not really anti-democratic, and that's where if you had a cap on spending in each electorate like you have in New South Wales state level, it means that a small party like yours or a community organised group party like yours can compete versus major parties and others because they've got a cap, and there's not like it's not like I can raise 120,000 for my community, but it's entirely smashed by somebody that's got a war chest of $6 million. That's not what you want, because then it discourages community involvement.
But the war chest won't really work if you've got a strong community that are talking amongst themselves.
Well, it's also the thing about, and that goes to that point about the other thing that is powerful about a community-based party is that in India, they have 1,700 members turn up to hand out and vote. Now, the major parties don't have that anymore because they've lost that touch with their grassroots and their community. So, that in itself is powerful. That in itself replaces a lot of money.
Now, we're running out of time. We have, in fact, got 3 minutes. There are 3 of you to give closing statements, but I just need to ask this question that George has asked, which is, how much can I donate without being identified?
Look, we are finalising the policy for that, and we'll have that up on our website very soon. But the major parties, in terms of election donations, it's over $14,000. And at this stage, we are looking at anything over $10,000 that the person's name will be disclosed. So you can donate up to that, and your name will not be disclosed unless you allow for that to be the case.
Let me point out, Kylie, that the Labor Party declares anything over $1,000.
We will be declaring donations. That's right, of $1,000. But in terms of the names, that detail is yet to be worked out.
And Craig, I'm going to go to you for your final statement. And Ruth has just said, when the film is released by the ABC, will there be something advertised that people can sign if they too are horrified? Whoa.
Well, you can go to there's a website. I mean, you can join it. makeitaBigDeal.org is the kind of movie website, and you can join in there. MakeitaBigDeal.org. Have a look there. But yeah, look, you're already doing. I mean, to be honest, the people that have turned up here tonight to listen into a conversation like this, you guys are the great people being active in your democracy, and I'm really impressed by that. And I think that the thing that I learned the most from doing this documentary was how many people are doing that, how many people are getting engaged, and I think that's a really important thing. And let's keep it up. Keep expanding this. And as I said, it's not whether it's about winning the seat or not winning the seat or any of that stuff, whether you're Liberal, Labor or not, or independent. It's about people really being engaged and being heard, not just on election day, but also between elections as well. And, I think, you're doing, there's 2 things that need to be fixed. The voice of the kind of big donors needs to be brought down, but the voice of the community needs to be brought up. And that's what you guys are doing. So congratulations.
Oh, thanks, Craig. And thank you so much for the work that you do and the bravery. Then you just do it. It's wonderful. And Saffron, what gives you hope for the future?
I go with Tina. There is no alternative to hope. Only one planet. I have 3 children. I'll be working on this and until I keel right over. And the future is not set by any means, and in large part will be what we make it. So yeah, all of this is movable. We can't control exactly what the future holds for us, but we can shape it. And this is the way that we can have power, by finding people who share our concerns and our values and working with them to make the world more like the way we want it to be. And
Kylie, what gives you hope?
Sorry, my internet's unstable at the moment, so I hope I get this in. Look, the creation of this movement and the momentum that is being created at the moment in Goldstein is inspiring and exciting. So it's lovely to be a part of this community, and I really look forward to seeing it continue to grow. We are talking, so there was a question in the chat as well. Have you got a candidate yet? We do have a number of people who have nominated and are going through a process of screening, and we do hope to find a strong candidate, and that will be announced within the next couple of months.
And just in closing, I'd like to congratulate the Voices of Goldstein as well, and of course Craig and Saffron for the work that you do. And my grandmother and my mother would both think this was wonderful, and they'd be in it and they'd be making scones and going for it. And can I just give you a quote from my grandfather in 1939 when he was the chairman of the Foreshore Erosion Committee, and he said, he was an engineer, and he said, we as engineers are just custodians of this land, and we need to make sure that we look after it. And I read that. It was 1939, and it still rings true. And as far as Bayside and Goldstein is concerned, we are the custodians for now, along with the traditional custodians, but we are the custodians at the moment, and we need to look after it and work together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's coming up next, Craig? What's the next one?
It's Big Deal Part 2.
Can I just
trying to figure that out now.
I love it. And keep an eye on the ABC for when it's coming out. I think it's in a couple of weeks, and it'll be fabulous. Thank you so much to our panel, to Craig and Saffron and Kylie, and thank you to all the organisers from Voices of Goldstein, and thank you all my fellow Baysiders. I'll see you down at North Road walking me doggy. And thank you so much for coming.